Chapter 2, Section 3. Sunday afternoon, and the work went forward with never a hitch. Even Dove and Dusty were good and obedient, although Dove was half threatened to tell old Grandpa when he got home. Johnny did not care what his master might say. Only, please God, the basin were done and Mr. Hancock come again and again with his rich orders. If Mr. Lapham was angry, he could sell Johnny's time to Paul Revere. The four girls, still dressed in their pretty go-to-meeting frocks, watched him with fascinated, admiring eyes. Their mothers sent them out of doors. Did the smoke from the furnace show from the wharf? From Fish Street? Did they hear any comments? Having found for himself the proper willow charcoal, Johnny went quickly ahead with his casting. He set his two wax models in wet sand. The furnace was piping hot. His hands were very sure. He was confident he could do the work, yet inside he was keyed up and jumpy. Mrs. Lapham fussed about him, and he ordered her to do simple things. "Not the draft yet, Mrs. Lapham. Now get to work with the bellows." Once he even told her to "look sharp," and she took it with a humble, "Yes, Johnny." "Now fetch me the crucible." She turned to Dove. "Which one does he want, boy?" "I'll get her down." Dove went to the shelves where the crucibles for melting silver were kept. Johnny did not see Dove standing on a stool, reaching far back and carefully taking out a cracked crucible. Dusty saw him and giggled. He knew the crack in it was so small it was hard even to see. It might stand the heat of the furnace, but the chances were that it would not. That was why Mr. Lapham had put it so far back. Both he and Dove thought it would just about serve Johnny Tremain right, after the insufferable way he had been bossing everybody. If the crucible gave way, and the hot silver did spill all over the top of the furnace, it would certainly make Johnny look like a fool, after all his fussing. Johnny took the cracked crucible in his trusting hands, put in it silver ingots, set it on top of the furnace. Scylla flew in. "Ma, there's a man looking at our chimney." "How's he dressed?" "Seafaring man." No seafaring man ever objected to a little Sabbath breaking. But mind, if you see any deacons or constables. The work went on. Isana sat with the cat in her lap. "Johnny's going to hell," she said firmly. Johnny himself thought this was possible. He called to Mrs. Lapham to "look sharp" and put the old silver turnip watch where he could see it. The silver must be run at a certain speed and be allowed to cool for just so long. Mrs. Lapham was so slavishly eager to help him, he almost felt fond of her. He did not notice Dusty and Dove snickering in the corner. Some of the beeswax he had used for his models had been left too near the furnace. It had melted and run over the floor. Johnny had been taught to clean up as he went along, but today he was in too much of a hurry to bother. "Johnny," cried Mrs. Lapham, "isn't it time to pour?" "Look, the silver's melted and begun to wink." It was true. He moved forward delicately, his right hand outstretched. The crucible began to settle, collapse. The silver was running over the top of the furnace like spilled milk. Johnny jumped toward it, his right hand still outstretched. Something happened. He never knew exactly what. His feet went out from under him. His hand came down on the top of the furnace. The burn was so terrible, he at first felt no pain, but stood stupidly looking at his hand. For 1 second, before the metal cooled, the inside of his right hand from wrist to fingertips was coated with solid silver. He looked at the back of his hand. It was as always. Then he smelled burned flesh. The room blackened and tipped around him. He heard a roaring in his ears. When he came to, he was stretched out upon the floor. Dorcas was trying to pour brandy down his throat. Mrs. Lapham had plunged the burned hand into a pan full of flour and was yelling at Madge to hurry with her bread poultice. He saw Scylla's face. It was literally green. "Ma," she said, licking her white lips, "shall I run for Dr. Warren?" "No, no. Oh, wait. I've got to think. I don't want any of them doctors to know he was breaking Sabbath day. And we don't need no doctor for just a burn. Scylla, you run down the wharf, and you fetch that old midwife, Gran. Hopper. These old women know better than any doctor how to cure things like this. Johnny, how do you feel? All right. Hurt yet? Not yet. He knew it would later.